The church bells tolled, but they couldn't drown out the scream in Ethan's chest. He stood at the back of the pews, watching his sister, Lily, glide down the aisle toward a man he'd spent years hating. Caleb Reed, the groom, had once made Ethan's life a living hell. Ethan was 16 when Caleb, the high school quarterback, cornered him behind the bleachers and sneered, "Faggot, you'll never belong here." Those words, sharp as a blade, carved into Ethan's soul, forcing him to hide who he was in their small, conservative town of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania. Now, a decade later, Caleb stood at the altar, smiling like he'd never shattered Ethan's world, about to marry the one person Ethan loved most, his sister. The church was packed with familiar faces, neighbors, family friends, and relatives who'd whispered about Ethan's choices behind his back. He adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of their gazes. He'd come out at 20, after moving to Philadelphia, where he could breathe freely as a gay man. But returning to Willow Creek for Lily's wedding felt like stepping back into a cage. He'd only agreed to attend because Lily begged him, her voice trembling over the phone. "Ethan, I need you there. Please." How could he say no to her? Lily looked radiant in her white gown, her blonde hair catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Ethan's heart ached with love for her, but it twisted with betrayal, too. How could she love Caleb? How could she not see the monster Ethan saw? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm as the ceremony began. Caleb's vows were smooth, practiced, and infuriatingly charming. "Lily, you've made me a better man," he said, his voice steady. Ethan scoffed under his breath, earning a sharp glance from his mother, Diane, seated beside him. She'd always defended Caleb, calling him a good Christian boy who'd grown out of his teenage cruelty. Ethan didn't buy it. People like Caleb didn't change. They just got better at hiding. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. Ethan clapped mechanically, his eyes fixed on Caleb. There was something different about him today, a softness in his posture that Ethan couldn't place. It unsettled him. He wanted to believe it was an act, but a nagging doubt gnawed at him. What if he was wrong? The reception was held at the Willow Creek Community Center, a rustic hall decked out in fairy lights and white roses. Ethan lingered near the bar, nursing a whiskey, avoiding the dance floor where Caleb and Lily swayed to a slow country song. He felt like an outsider in his own family, the black sheep who'd dared to live authentically. His father, Robert, approached, his face lined with the same disapproval Ethan had faced since coming out. "You could at least smile," Robert said gruffly. "This is your sister's day." "I'm here, aren't I?" Ethan replied, his voice tight. "That's more than enough." Robert shook his head and walked away, leaving Ethan to stew in his resentment. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a man standing alone near the dessert table. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a quiet intensity, the stranger seemed out of place among the cheerful guests. Their eyes met, and the man offered a small, knowing smile, as if he understood Ethan's discomfort. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he looked away, chastising himself. This wasn't the place to notice anyone. As the night wore on, Ethan overheard snippets of conversation. Praise for Caleb's success as a local contractor, admiration for his devotion to Lily. It made Ethan's stomach churn. He slipped outside for air, the cool September evening soothing his frayed nerves. The stars were bright above Willow Creek, a reminder of the nights he and Lily used to lie in the backyard, dreaming of futures far from this town. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. Ethan turned to see the man from the dessert table, holding 2 glasses of wine. Up close, he was even more striking. Green eyes, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, and a warmth that disarmed Ethan's defenses. "I'm Jack," the man said, offering a glass. "Friend of Caleb's from college." "Ethan," he replied, taking the glass reluctantly. "Lily's brother." Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "I figured. You don't look like you're enjoying yourself." Ethan snorted. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been the odd one out," Jack said, his tone gentle but probing. Small towns aren't always kind to people like us. Ethan froze, the words hitting like a thunderbolt. Did Jack know? Or is he just guessing? Before he could respond, the door swung open, and Caleb stepped outside, his tie loosened, his face flushed from dancing. "Ethan," Caleb said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Can we talk?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I've got nothing to say to you." "Please," Caleb said, his eyes pleading. "It's important." Jack stepped back, giving them space, but his presence lingered in Ethan's mind. Caleb took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I owe you an apology for everything I did back then. I was a stupid kid, and I hurt you. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Ethan wanted to lash out, to tell Caleb his apology meant nothing, but something in Caleb's expression stopped him. There was a rawness there, a vulnerability Ethan hadn't expected. He didn't trust it, but he couldn't ignore it either. "I don't need your pity," Ethan said finally, his voice cold. "Just stay away from me." Caleb nodded, his shoulders slumping, and walked back inside. Ethan turned to Jack, who was watching him with quiet concern. "You okay?" Jack asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time that night, he felt seen, not as Lily's brother, not as the town's outcast, but as himself. And that terrified him as much as it thrilled him. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but Ethan felt like he was underwater, the sounds muffled by the storm in his head. Caleb's apology echoed, each word a splinter under his skin. He wanted to dismiss it, to cling to the anger that had shielded him for years, but doubt crept in like a thief, stealing his certainty. Jack hadn't left his side since their conversation outside. They sat at a corner table, away from the crowd, sharing stories of city life and small-town scars. Jack was a graphic designer from Pittsburgh, invited to the wedding because he'd roomed with Caleb during their freshman year at Penn State. His easy laugh and sharp wit drew Ethan in, but it was the way Jack listened, really listened, that made Ethan's guard waver. "You ever think about forgiving him?" Jack asked, swirling his wine. His tone wasn't judgmental, just curious, but the question hit Ethan like a punch. "Forgive Caleb?" Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You don't know what he did to me. The things he said, they made me hate myself for years." Jack nodded, his eyes soft but unflinching. "I get it. I grew up in a town like this. Kids threw rocks at me when they found out I was gay. But sometimes people change. Not always, but sometimes." Ethan wanted to argue, to say Caleb was beyond redemption, but the memory of Caleb's face, earnest, almost broken, kept him silent. He sipped his whiskey, letting the burn distract him from the ache in his chest. Jack reached across the table, his fingers brushing Ethan's hand, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through him. "Let's dance," Jack said suddenly, standing and offering his hand. "You look like you need to feel something else for a while." Ethan hesitated. Dancing with another man in Willow Creek was a bold move, even at a wedding where half the guests were tipsy. But Jack's smile was a challenge, and Ethan wasn't one to back down. He took Jack's hand, letting himself be led to the dance floor. The band played a slow cover of Can't Help Falling in Love, and Jack pulled Ethan close, their movements tentative at first. Ethan could feel eyes on them, some curious, some disapproving, but Jack's steady grip grounded him. For the first time that night, Ethan felt alive, not just surviving. "You're braver than you think," Jack whispered, his breath warm against Ethan's ear. Ethan's heart stuttered. "I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me be your anchor," Jack said, his voice low and sure. The song ended, but they didn't let go, standing still as the world spun around them. Ethan caught Lily's eye across the room. She was watching them, a small smile on her lips, but there was something else in her expression, worry, maybe, or guilt. Before Ethan could process it, Caleb approached, his face tense. "Lily wants a family photo," Caleb said, his voice neutral but his eyes darting between Ethan and Jack. "You in?" Ethan nodded, reluctantly stepping away from Jack. The photographer gathered the family near the cake, positioning Ethan between his parents. Caleb stood next to Lily, his arm around her waist. As the camera flashed, Ethan felt a pang of isolation. This was supposed to be a moment of unity, but he never felt more alone. After the photo, Lily pulled Ethan aside, her eyes searching his. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I saw you with that guy. Jack, right? He seems nice." "He is," Ethan said, his tone guarded. "But I'm not here to talk about my love life. Why didn't you tell me about Caleb? About who he really was?" Lily's face fell. "I tried, Ethan. I wanted to tell you he'd changed, but you wouldn't listen. You were so angry. Because he hurt me." Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "And you chose him anyway." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I love him, Ethan. He's not the same person he was. He spent years trying to make up for what he did." "Words don't erase pain," Ethan said, turning away. He felt her hand on his arm, but he shook it off, walking back to Jack, who was waiting by the bar. "You okay?" Jack asked, his voice a lifeline. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." The night wore on, and Ethan found himself opening up to Jack in ways he hadn't expected. They talked about their dreams, their fears, the weight of growing up different in places that demanded conformity. Jack's stories mirrored Ethan's: bullying, isolation, the slow climb to self-acceptance. It was a connection Ethan hadn't felt in years, raw and real. As the reception wound down, Caleb took the microphone for his groom's speech. Ethan braced himself, expecting a generic toast. But Caleb's voice trembled as he began, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Ethan. "I need to say something," Caleb said, gripping the microphone. 10 years ago, I was a coward. I hurt someone I should have protected. Ethan, I was cruel to you, and I've carried that shame every day since. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm not that person anymore. Lily showed me what it means to love without judgment, and I'm trying to live up to that." The room fell silent, all eyes on Ethan. His throat tightened, his anger warring with something softer, something he wasn't ready to name. Jack's hand found his under the table, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone. Ethan's heart pounded as Caleb's words hung in the air, a confession that felt like both a wound and a bandage. The reception hall was a frozen tableau, guests holding their breath, waiting for Ethan's reaction. He wanted to run, to escape the weight of Caleb's apology and the eyes boring into him, but Jack's hand, warm and steady, kept him grounded. "I need some air," Ethan muttered, pulling away from Jack and weaving through the crowd. He pushed open the door to the patio, the cool night air hitting his face like a slap. The stars above Willow Creek were relentless in their clarity, mocking his confusion. He leaned against the railing, his breath ragged, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions Caleb's speech had unleashed. Jack followed, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "That was intense," he said, stopping a few feet away, giving Ethan space. "You don't have to decide how you feel right now, you know." Ethan laughed bitterly. "I've spent 10 years hating him, Jack. And now he's sorry? What am I supposed to do with that?" Jack stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't owe him anything, but maybe you owe yourself the chance to let go. Not for him, for you." Ethan looked at Jack, his green eyes catching the glow of the fairy lights strung across the patio. There was no judgment there, only understanding, and it made Ethan's chest ache with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but the door swung open again, and Lily appeared, her wedding dress shimmering in the dim light. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Can we talk?" He nodded, though every instinct screamed to walk away. Jack gave him an encouraging nod and stepped back inside, leaving Ethan and Lily alone. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if bracing for a storm. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything," Lily began. "When I met Caleb again, years after high school, he was different. He told me what he did to you, how much he regretted it. I didn't believe him at first, but he spent years proving he's changed, volunteering at the community center, standing up for kids who get bullied. I love him, Ethan, but I love you too. I never wanted to hurt you. Ethan's throat burned. You should have told me. I deserve to know. I know, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was scared you'd hate me. You're my brother, Ethan. You're my best friend. Her words cracked something open in him, a flood of memories, late-night talks, shared secrets, the way Lily had always defended him, even when their parents didn't. He wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the pain that had defined him for so long, but seeing her now, vulnerable and pleading, he felt his resolve weaken. I don't hate you, he said finally, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to trust him. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. Give him a chance. Not for me, but for you. You deserve to heal. They stood in silence, the weight of their shared history settling between them. Ethan thought of Jack's words, about letting go for his own sake. He wasn't ready to forgive Caleb, not yet, but for Lily, he could try to understand. Back inside, the reception was winding down, guests trickling out into the night. Ethan found Jack near the bar, his smile a beacon in the dim light. You survived, Jack said, his tone teasing but warm. Barely, Ethan replied, managing a small smile. Thanks for being here. Jack's eyes softened. Anytime, Ethan. I mean that. As they talked, Ethan noticed Caleb across the room, helping an elderly guest with her coat. There was a gentleness in his actions, a quiet sincerity that didn't align with the bully Ethan remembered. It confused him, made him question the narrative he'd clung to for so long. The next morning, Ethan woke in his childhood bedroom, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding him in a past he'd tried to escape. He'd agreed to stay for the weekend, at Lily's insistence, to spend time with family before returning to Philadelphia. But the thought of facing Caleb again made his stomach twist. At breakfast, the family gathered around the kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken tension. Diane fussed over the pancakes, while Robert read the newspaper, pretending nothing had happened. Caleb and Lily sat close, their hands intertwined, and Ethan couldn't help but notice how Caleb's thumb brushed gently over Lily's knuckles, a small gesture that spoke of care. Ethan, Caleb said, breaking the silence. I meant what I said last night. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to be better. If there's anything I can do to prove it, tell me. Ethan stared at his plate, the weight of Caleb's words pressing against his chest. He wanted to lash out, to demand answers, but Jack's voice echoed in his mind. You don't owe him anything. He took a deep breath, meeting Caleb's gaze. I don't know what you can do, Ethan said honestly, but I'm here, for Lily. That's all I can promise right now. Caleb nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. That's enough. As breakfast continued, Ethan felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. The anger that had defined him for so long was still there, but it was softer now, less all-consuming. And when Jack texted him later, asking if he wanted to grab coffee before leaving town, Ethan's heart lifted. Maybe, just maybe, Willow Creek wasn't just a place of pain anymore. The coffee shop on Main Street smelled of cinnamon and fresh-baked bread, a small haven in the heart of Willow Creek. Ethan sat across from Jack, their knees brushing under the table, the morning light casting soft shadows on Jack's face. They'd spent the past hour talking about everything and nothing. Art, music, the way cities felt like freedom while small towns felt like anchors. Ethan hadn't laughed this much in years, and it scared him how easy it felt to be with Jack. You're different here, Jack said, stirring his latte. Less guarded. I like it. Ethan flushed, looking down at his coffee. I don't know how to do this. Be myself in a place that's never wanted me to. Jack reached across the table, his fingers grazing Ethan's. You're doing it right now. That's enough. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. Ethan felt a pull, a longing to lean in, to close the distance, but the bell above the door jingled, shattering the moment. Caleb walked in, spotting them immediately. He hesitated, then approached, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb asked, his voice cautious. Ethan tensed, but Jack gave him a subtle nod, as if to say, "You've got this." Ethan gestured to an empty chair, his jaw tight. Caleb sat, looking out of place in his flannel shirt, like he was trying too hard to fit into this new version of himself. "I didn't expect to see you here," Caleb said, his eyes flickering between Ethan and Jack. I wanted to check in. After last night." Ethan's instinct was to shut him down, but something in Caleb's posture, hunched, almost fragile, made him pause. "What do you want, Caleb?" he asked, his tone flat but not hostile. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "I want to make things right. I know I can't erase what I did, but I've been trying to understand why I was that way. I was scared back then, Ethan. Scared of who I was, of what people would think. I took out on you, and that was wrong." Ethan's breath caught. Scared of who I was. The words hit too close, stirring memories of his own fear, his own years of hiding. "You're saying you were cruel because you were what?" Confused. Caleb's face reddened, but he didn't look away. "I'm not making excuses. I was a bully, and I own that. But yeah, I was wrestling with things I didn't understand. Meeting Lily, loving her, it made me face those parts of myself. I'm still learning." Ethan's mind reeled. Was Caleb admitting to something deeper, something unspoken? He glanced at Jack, who was watching Caleb with a mix of curiosity and caution. Ethan wanted to press, to demand clarity, but the words stuck in his throat. "Thanks for being honest," Ethan said finally, his voice steady but distant. "I need time to process this." Caleb nodded, standing. "I get it. I'll be around if you want to talk." As Caleb left, Jack leaned forward, his voice low. "That was heavy. You okay?" Ethan shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know what I am anymore. He's not the monster I thought he was, and that's confusing." Jack squeezed his hand, a quiet promise of support. They finished their coffee, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but Ethan's mind kept circling back to Caleb's words. Scared of who I was. It was a thread he couldn't stop pulling. That afternoon, Ethan joined Lily and their parents for a family lunch at the house. The tension from breakfast lingered, but Lily's laughter and Diane's fussing over the food softened the edges. Caleb was there, too, quieter than usual, helping Robert clear the table without being asked. Ethan watched him, searching for the boy who'd tormented him, but all he saw was a man trying to belong. After lunch, Ethan and Lily took a walk to the lake, a place they'd always gone to escape. The water was calm, reflecting the autumn leaves, and for a while they just stood there, the silence comfortable. "Do you hate me?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice small. Ethan turned to her, surprised. "No, never. I'm just trying to understand." She nodded, her eyes on the water. "Caleb's not perfect, but he's trying. He loves me, and he wants to make things right with you. I know it's hard, but can you try too? For me." Ethan sighed, the weight of her request settling over him. "I'll try, but it's not easy, Lily." "I know," she said, looping her arm through his. "But you're the strongest person I know." They walked back to the house, and Ethan felt a flicker of peace, fragile but real. That evening, he met Jack at the lake again, the same spot where they'd stood earlier. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and Jack's presence felt like a promise of something new. "Willow Creek's starting to feel different," Ethan said, his voice soft. Jack smiled, stepping closer. "Maybe it's not the town. Maybe it's you." When Jack kissed him, soft and tentative, Ethan didn't pull away. The world didn't end, the stars didn't fall, and for the first time in Willow Creek, Ethan felt like he could breathe. The lake shimmered under the early morning light as Ethan stood on the dock, his breath visible in the crisp September air. He'd spent the night replaying Jack's kiss, Caleb's confession, and Lily's plea, each moment a thread in a tapestry he was only beginning to understand. Today was his last day in Willow Creek before returning to Philadelphia, and he felt both lighter and heavier than when he'd arrived. Jack met him at the dock, his scarf loose around his neck, his smile as warm as the rising sun. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, handing Ethan a thermos of coffee. Ethan took it, their fingers brushing. "Too much to think about. You ever feel like your past is a puzzle you'll never solve?" "All the time," Jack said, sitting on the edge of the dock, his legs dangling over the water. "But sometimes the pieces start to fit when you stop forcing them." Ethan sat beside him, the wood creaking under their weight. He wanted to stay in this moment, where Jack's presence made everything simpler, but Caleb's shadow loomed. Ethan had avoided him since the coffee shop, but he knew he couldn't leave town without confronting the truth. "I need to talk to Caleb," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the churn in his stomach. "I need to know who he is now, not just who he was." Jack nodded, his eyes full of quiet strength. "I'll be here when you're done." Ethan found Caleb at the community center, setting up chairs for a youth group meeting. The space was bright, filled with posters about inclusivity and support, a far cry from the Willow Creek Ethan remembered. Caleb looked up, surprised, then set down a chair, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Ethan," Caleb said, his voice cautious but hopeful. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either," Ethan admitted, crossing his arms. "But I need answers. You said you were scared of who you were. What did you mean?" Caleb's face tightened, but he didn't look away. "I was raised to believe certain things about masculinity, about what's normal. When I saw you, so sure of who you were even back then, it scared me. I was jealous, and I was questioning things about myself I wasn't ready to face." Ethan's heart stuttered. "Are you saying you're—" "No," Caleb said quickly, then paused, his voice softening. "Maybe. I don't know. I loved Lily from the moment I saw her again, and that's real. But back then, I was a mess of fear and shame, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'll spend my life making up for it, if you'll let me." The sincerity in Caleb's voice was undeniable, and for the first time, Ethan saw him not as a bully, but as a man grappling with his own demons. It didn't erase the pain, but it made it easier to breathe. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," Ethan said, his voice raw. "But I don't hate you anymore. That's something." Caleb's eyes glistened, and he nodded. "It's more than I deserve." They stood in silence, the weight of their past lifting just enough to let light through. Ethan left the community center with a clarity he hadn't expected. He wasn't ready to embrace Caleb as family, but he could see a path forward, one where healing wasn't just a dream. That afternoon, Ethan and Lily sat in the backyard, the same spot where they'd once planned their escapes. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they watched the clouds drift by. "I'm proud of you," Lily said, "for staying, for trying. It means everything." "I did it for you," Ethan said, then smiled. "And maybe a little for me." When it was time to leave, Jack drove Ethan to the bus station, their hands linked on the center console. The goodbye was quiet, filled with promises to meet again in Philadelphia, to see where this spark could lead. As the bus pulled away, Ethan looked out the window, Willow Creek fading into the distance, but not his heart. Back in Philadelphia, Ethan carried the lessons of the weekend with him. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something better: hope. Hope that pain could soften, that love could bridge divides, that a small town could change, even if just a little. And as he texted Jack, a smile tugging at his lips, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready to face it, not as the boy who'd been broken, but as the man who'd chosen to heal.